All righty. I am pleased to be joined by John and Andy of the Outlap F1 podcast. How's it going, guys?
Good, real good, man. We got one race under our belt for this Formula One season. And if we have 22 more like the first one, we are set for an awesome season. So I think we are very, very fired up over here.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably one of the best starts of the season we've had in a long time. Things are, the stars look like they're aligning for a hell of a season. And we appreciate you having us on. Anytime we can talk F1 is a good thing for us. So generally speaking, we're texting about F1 23 hours a day. It feels like most days. So it's always good to get on and talk and spread the word of F1 for sure.
Yeah, I just started recently getting into Formula One. I was more of a NASCAR guy, but recently I kind of been checking it out. Really looks really fun, and especially with what happens, it's a lot quicker than NASCAR, so it's totally different. So, and I saw you guys' podcast, wanted to get you guys on. Of course, the first race was epic this season at Bahrain. What did you guys think of the performance that Lewis Hamilton was able to hold off Max Verstappen?
Two factors I think that led to it. One, incredible car control by Lewis in the closing laps. Basically, with about 3 laps to go, he has an off where it allowed Max to get really, really close, and then we all kind of saw that dive bomb move with 3 laps to go. Max has to go off the track in order to pull that off, so he was told immediately give the position back. And the other combination was, whatever happened when he gave that position back, whether he had used up all of his tires, not necessarily really sure exactly what happened, but his pace fell off. And that allowed Lewis to basically get really super clinical with it and say, okay, I'm going to put this car in the most difficult position possible in order to have Max pull off another overtake. And Max was never able to do it. He was only able to get within a second in the last lap, and it just wasn't enough. So combination of Max kind of using up all his resources and incredible car control by one of the greatest of all time, Lewis Hamilton, enabled him to take a race win in a car that probably wasn't the quickest.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Andy. I mean, certainly Mercedes really, honestly, for the first time in many years, had no business winning that race. They were absolutely not the fastest car on track. That was beyond a doubt Max Verstappen. From a strategy standpoint, from a pace standpoint, going all the way back to preseason testing, which coincidentally was actually at the same track as well. And for the first time in years, the guy leading in preseason testing was legitimately the one that everybody needed to worry about. Usually if there's some sandbagging involved and not everybody's showing their pace, and we only take preseason testing with a grain of salt. But this year, Red Bull looked strong from day one of preseason testing. They showed back up at that Bahrain race, and they looked, all weekend they looked dominant. To Andy's point, Lewis has an uncanny ability to of car control. He's aggressive as hell, but he's so clinical. You rarely ever see the guy make a mistake. Normally he's the one forcing guys into making a mistake. And just like in that example, with him and Max this week or that week, I don't think Max made a mistake necessarily, but Lewis put his car in such a place where there was no way that a pass was going to happen unless there was a collision or he went off track. Max Verstappen is probably one of the, he's a young gun. He's probably the most aggressive driver out there. So you've got, both ends of the spectrum when it comes to clinical versus aggressiveness, one trying to pass the other. But both drivers were incredible. It put on one hell of a show. Throughout the race, strategy wise, one would take the lead, the other one would chase that guy down on fresher tires. The leader would pit, get fresher tires, and we just had that sequence of back and forth throughout the entire 56 laps. And I think Max, to your point, Andy, just used up a little bit of too much of his stuff trying to get up there. The old saying is, it's one thing to catch a guy, it's another thing to pass him, and we saw that Sunday night for sure.
Talking about Red Bull, they recently have a new engine, or Honda has a new engine for them. I've heard a lot about that. Can you tell me more about the new engine for Red Bull?
So this is Honda's last year in the sport. So it's basically the same engine, but it's an evolution of what they've been doing. They came back into the sport in 2015, and let's be honest, they struggled. They had a partnership with the team that I support, McLaren, and it was painful. So they learned a lot very quickly about how to build and rebuild an engine after it would explode. So as they've gotten kind of their feet wet and they've got their feet under them, they slowly but surely have made substantial progress year after year after year. This last season that Honda's going to be in, they even last year, I would say they were kind of on par with all the other power unit manufacturers. And that was really the first time that you could really say that. This season, with this being Honda's last, they are bringing every upgrade that they've ever thought of to the table this season. So you're getting the most experimental Honda engine that they're probably ever going to come up with thrown into the back of those Red Bulls and the AlphaTauris this year. And they're going to see what happens. So if they think they can squeeze an ounce of performance out of it, they're going to do it. Because they're trying to, one, get the best rep that they can, and two, try to salvage what has been a very ugly chapter in their Formula One existence. So I think that's the way that they should have gone from the beginning, is kind of go, all the way in. But now that they've done it, I think it's going to be really interesting going forward for this season.
Yeah, for a team that has a very historic career, for lack of a better word, in Formula One, their time back in Formula One, to Andy's point, especially with McLaren, was really a black eye for McLaren, and certainly a black eye for Honda. And really, Japan as a whole, it was a disappointing thing. Honda is Japan and Japan is Honda. And obviously, we go there every year. They have probably some of the most passionate fans on planet Earth, outside of maybe Ferrari. And, they live and breathe Formula One. They live and breathe racing. And it was tremendously a black eye. I'm also obviously a Mercedes guy, but I'm also a big McLaren guy. And it was painful to watch for quite a few years there. The big thing for them, obviously, Red Bull is kind of taking over that engine department, and we'll kind of foresee it moving forward. Likely, we think there's going to be a new engine deal in 2025, is kind of the rumor that everyone's put in play. And one of the big factors to kind of all this aligning was that Red Bull was able to convince both the FIA, which is the governing body of Formula One, and the other teams all synonymously agree that they would put an engine freeze in place, a development freeze. So typically speaking, every single year, every team is trying to bring the best and the best and the best and the best. And then after this, they're basically saying, all right, here's what you've got is what you've got until 2025. So I think obviously that was a huge win for Red Bull and AlphaTauri. It helps, Honda kind of wrap things up and put a bow on it for Red Bull to take off and kind of make their baby. But it's also good for the sport as well. I mean, we're talking about teams that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars every single year to get a tenth or two faster on the track. And so this kind of levels the playing field. We've got a lot of teams. We've got the big giants, the McLarens, the Mercedes, the Red Bulls, the Ferraris of the group. And then we've got, the American team like Haas, that's on the opposite end of the spectrum from a financial standpoint, and kind of, grabbing at pennies basically, and to make ends meet from race to race. So this kind of levels that playing field, which I think ultimately is going to be good for the sport moving forward. Hopefully bring everybody together on a pace standpoint.
There's another team that had a pretty good year last year, and they used to be Racing Point. Now they're Aston Martin. How well do you think they'll do this season?
I'm going to take a quote from Mr. T in Rocky 3, and I'm just going to say pain. It did not go well for Aston Martin at the first race. It did not go well for them in the test. They kind of backed into some really good performances last season by effectively, and they even came out and admitted it, they just said, you know what, we're going to look at the Mercedes car. We know that that's the dominant car, and we're just going to make a copy of it and dare you to come and tell us that it's illegal because we don't think it is. And so they did that, and it worked. But now they've changed the rules so that you can't exactly do what they did before. And now they've had to go off on their own, and they're struggling a little bit. So I don't know that they're going to be able to repeat their performances of last year this season. What is interesting, however, for that team in 2022 is everything gets reset. Now they are well-funded. Now they have backing by Lawrence Stroll. And they've basically kind of got all their ducks in a row. So I do think while this season may be a struggle for them, I think that's where the power base is moving into that team moving forward, and they're going to be something to deal with in the next couple of years for sure.
Yeah, they kind of threw all their eggs into one basket last year, with the copying of Mercedes. And for the most part, it worked out pretty well. But historically speaking, going back to even before their Racing Point, when they were called Force India, that's always been a relatively low budget team. I'd say kind of middle of the ground. They've always hit above their weight class. They've achieved more than they probably on paper ever should have. And so I'm hopeful, and I think certainly Andy is, and I think everyone of F1 really is hopeful that now that they've got some legitimate funding, I think they're going to hit the reset button this year, knowing that the cars are going to be basically from ground up are going to be completely different next year. I think they're likely going to try to say, all right, let's put a Band-Aid on this year, get through it, and put all of our money, all of our development into the upcoming year. So unfortunately, I agree with Andy. I think they're going to struggle on track this year, unfortunately. But let's not kill ourselves. Having Aston Martin in Formula One is a damn good thing for the sport. Obviously it's one of the most recognizable brands out there. They've got such a phenomenal history in racing, not necessarily in Formula One, but across many forms of racing. So it's good to see a green car back on track.
Yeah, you mentioned everything gets reset. I'm not too familiar with that. Could you explain more like how everything gets reset and stuff like that?
Sure. So every few years they literally change. It's called Formula One because it's literally a racing formula that is designed to be the fastest in the world. So that's where you get Formula and One, and that's how it comes together. So what they do every few years is they literally will change the racing formula. And in 2022, it was supposed to happen in 2021. COVID happened, and then that pushed everything back. But 2022 is supposed to be probably the biggest set of formulaic changes to the cars that has happened in maybe the last 10 or 15 years. So next year's cars are going to look completely different than they do now. They're going to work completely different than they do now. The engines are going to be different than what is in there now, and the tires are going to be different than what's in there now. So if you're liking what you see this year, enjoy it, because it may not come again for a while, in terms of at least how the cars look and the aesthetic and everything. So yeah, next year it's all going to reset. Everybody's and nobody's done this before. The teams actually got together and set some actually reasonable ground rules, and it's the first time in forever that I could ever remember as a fan that they've actually done this. So it promotes competition. It promotes a smaller team being able to punch above its weight. It promotes the bigger teams still necessarily having the resources to do well, but they have to get it right. So it's going to be very much a designer's formula next year. It's going to be an engineering formula next year. And we're going to see who's going to be able to come out on top. For the last 10 years or so, it's been Mercedes. It could be any one of the 9 teams or 10 teams that are in Formula One next year that get it right off the bat, and it could have a great year. So it's going to be really, really fun, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, and the whole purpose of kind of moving to a new design, to Andy's point, was to improve the on-track action. So we want teams closer together. We really ideally don't want one dominant team. Certainly if you're a Lewis Hamilton fan like me, it's been a nice run. But the bigger F1 fan in me wants to see that, like we saw at Bahrain, guys within a second of each other, wheel-to-wheel action on a week-to-week basis. We don't want to see a dominant team. We want to see a nice battle throughout 23 races, a title hopefully going down to the last race like we saw, in 2008 on the last lap of the last race. We see a title decided on that. That's what we want to see. That's the formula that hopefully we see moving forward. But so yeah, the cars are being redesigned to make them easier to overtake, to race close together in packs, and certainly won't be easy to drive. There's a reason why these are the best drivers in the world. These things are going to be absolute monsters to drive, but it should, at least on paper and everything that we've seen from aero standpoint, from the wind tunnels and everything else, it should allow these cars to really race in packs, and put on a phenomenal show for the fans. So yeah, everything's being reset from the ground up. The pecking order may shift dramatically when it comes to 2022. I know we're all looking forward to it. And the cars, I certainly encourage you to go Google, 2022 Formula One cars. They look phenomenal. They look like, one of the big thing is they wanted a car that people would be proud, a kid would be proud to put up on a poster on a wall and say, wow, that's a beautiful machine. And I think they certainly have achieved that. So yeah, we're in good hands, I think, for the future here in Formula One.
That makes a lot more sense. You want to make it more competitive because I know Lewis Hamilton has been dominating the last 3 or 4 years. And, I think you mentioned in 2022, they're getting a new version of the car, a new version, like a new F1 car. I think NASCAR is doing something like that as well. So
yep.
That's really intriguing, and definitely think that's going to make it more exciting, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, across all the forms. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
I was going to say
across all the forms of racing that we see in the States, it comes to NASCAR, IndyCar, World Endurance Championship, IMSA, which is also endurance racing, and certainly Formula One. They are all basically in the next 2 to 3 years are shifting to new cars, which should bring in hopefully a lot more manufacturers, which would be more teams, and certainly tighten up the competition. So I think if you're an American racing fan, and even if you're just now hopping on board like yourself, you're getting on the train at a good time because in the world of racing, things are probably as bright as they've been in decades. So
yeah, that makes a lot more sense. That makes it more competitive, and I can't wait for next year. And of course, this year you still got 22 more races to go, so it's going to be a fun year. So, do you have any predictions for the next race?
Interesting. I'm going to say probably hopefully more of the same, where I think you're going to have a really good fight between the top 2 teams, and that would be Red Bull and Mercedes. And then you get into, if you're going down the rest of the grid, this incredible fight between potentially the next 7 teams for who's kind of the best of the rest. Right now it's McLaren. The next race, it could be Ferrari, it could be AlphaTauri, it could be Aston Martin could show up with some sort of upgrade package and fix their woes. Everybody seems to be bringing the upgrades that they normally would reserve until maybe the middle of the season now. Basically because they want to kind of sign off on them, get them on the car, see if they work, and then try to move everything to 22. So you're going to see really quickly how these cars are developed, and you're going to have, I think, 2 huge fights, one for P1 and 2, and one for that third place in the Constructors Championship. So basically anywhere from 1 to 10, we don't know what's going to happen, and that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, going back and watching last year's race at this track, which I was actually doing this week in preparation for our podcast coming up, we had a hell of a good battle throughout the entire race. Unfortunately, it was cut short, a little bit short, because Max Verstappen had a mechanical issue, caused, I think, a right rear tire to blow, which put him into the sand, and that kind of killed that battle. But throughout that race, he and Lewis Hamilton were going neck and neck, exactly what we saw, at Bahrain. Certainly, Hamilton's teammate Valtteri Bottas was kind of in the mix as well. This is a very old school track. It's narrow. It's hard to pass. You really got to kind of send it. As the great Daniel Ricciardo would say, you got to lick the stamp and send it. If you're new to F1 and you're looking for a driver to support, Daniel Ricciardo is a good one to have. He just moved over to McLaren, so I know Andy is very happy to have him in Papaya Orange over there. But you're going to have to take some aggressive moves. You're going to have to take some chances that you may not normally have to take in a modern track, because of the fact that it is so skinny and it's nothing but sand around it. You really don't have a lot of room for error. But I think, looking back at that race, I would not be shocked in the least bit if Max Verstappen wins this race. But I think we're going to have, I think all 4 of the top 2, all 4 drivers from the top 2 teams, I think are very well going to be in the mix. It's all going to come down to, I think, strategy, who's going to make the right pit call, or the right pit stops at the right time. I think a little bit of luck could probably go a long way. We may see some carnage at the back. We certainly saw some of that last year, again, with it being a difficult track to pass. We're probably going to see some contact. And when that contact happens, could really change the strategy of the whole race. So I think it's going to be whoever's in the right place at the right time. But yeah, don't be shocked if a Red Bull wins this race for sure.
Yeah, you just mentioned Daniel Ricciardo, and I've heard him a few times. He's a pretty good driver. How well do you think he'll do with his new team?
Andy, I'll pass it over to you.
Well, I'm hoping the sky's the limit. I mean, they went after him a couple years ago, and he said no because he thought that the car wasn't there yet. He's now been kind of brought over, and he left which was a team in Renault, and now they're Alpine, that had kind of carved out a really comfortable niche for him. So now he's moving over to McLaren, basically where I think he kind of wanted to go, but he had to wait for the car to get good again. And now the car looks really good again. They've reunited with Mercedes, as they've gone around from, 6 years ago, they were McLaren Mercedes, then they were McLaren Honda, then they were McLaren Renault. Now they're back to being McLaren Mercedes again. So that's all come full circle, and it looks like that they've hit this season hit the ground running this season for the first time in a long time that I can remember. I mean, I have nightmares of certain test sessions where, if they got 5 laps on the board, you were like, hey, at least that's something. So they've gone through a really, really tough stretch, but he's coming into the team at a really good time. And the hope is that the sky is the limit, that the 2 drivers that they have in Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris are going to feed off each other, and they're going to compete with each other enough to hopefully bridge that gap to get to the top 2 teams, to hopefully by the end of this, maybe even by the end of the season, fighting with Red Bull, fighting maybe even with Mercedes. Might be a bit of a stretch, but as a fan, hey, I got to hope.
Yeah, if Daniel Ricciardo is the kind of driver that if the car is right and working well and doing what it's supposed to do, I mean, he's a multi-race winner. There's no reason that he shouldn't be in the mix. There's no reason that he couldn't be a future world champion. Again, if the machinery will do what it's supposed to do. If they give him a car that he can actually be racy with, again, he takes chances. He's one of the best overtakers on the grid, especially if the car is doing what it should be doing and he has confidence in that car. If they get him that confidence, really the sky is the limit for him. So yeah, he's a fun one to watch. I don't think I've ever seen the guy without a smile on his face. Like I said, if you're a new fan, you're looking for someone to get behind and support. I mean, you can't go wrong with the guy. He's got one of the best personalities out there. He's a fan favorite, and he's got the on track, performance to back it up as well.
And when he comes to America, he loves it. He basically adopted Austin, Texas as his second home. He goes all in with the local football team down there, the Longhorns. So he's one to get behind if you're a new fan and you're looking for a personality to go, I wonder who I should root for. He's a good one.
Yeah, he grew up as a kid, even though he's Australian. He grew up watching Dale Earnhardt Sr. in NASCAR. That's why he chose the number 3. He actually has a bet right now with the head of McLaren, Zach Brown, that if he gets a podium this year, he'll actually get to race the old number 3 Wrangler car from Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s. A few hot laps on that. So they've got a nice little bet going there. Not like Daniel Ricciardo needed any more motivation, but I think Dale Earnhardt Sr. is an icon to him, as it was to, so many racing fans out there. So he's got just a little bit of extra chip now to go for it. He's when he goes to Austin, Texas, a couple of years ago, he painted his helmet to look exactly like the Texas Longhorns football helmets. It was probably one of the coolest helmets I've ever seen. He's had his race suit redesigned a couple of years to look like he's got cowboy boots on. So he loves America, and American fans certainly love him as well. So he's a good one to support.
Yeah, to be honest, I think the first time I heard of Daniel Ricciardo was when Chase Elliott won the NASCAR Cup in October of last year, and he mentioned that Daniel Ricciardo congratulated him. So I think they're friends there. So that was the first time I actually heard of Daniel Ricciardo, but that's pretty cool, and I'll definitely check him out the next race.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was actually checking out the race schedule this year, and it seems like it's pretty spaced out. Is it normally like that, or is it just because of COVID and they have to quarantine after going to different countries?
I mean, it's interesting that from an outside perspective, you're saying it's spaced out. From an F1's fan's perspective, this thing is like super compressed. The norm is sometimes even maybe 5-6 years ago, there were maybe only 17 or 18 or 19 races in a year. This year we have 23. They've never done that before. So it's going to be a much larger strain on logistics. And the reason that they're spaced out is because you literally have to pack up the entire circus at the end of every Grand Prix. Literally, the checkered flag falls and the crews start working on tearing everything down, even while they're celebrating. They're celebrating and they're tearing stuff down. Why? Because they got to pack it all up and they got to move it to another country, to another part of the world. You know, when they're in Europe, they can be a little closer together because it's not necessarily as far, but they have a stretch where they go this is how it's scheduled. They go from Monaco, which is in Europe, to Canada, and then back into Europe again for a huge chunk of the season. So all of that logistics has to happen, and it all has to happen kind of on time. Otherwise, these guys, you may get a car with missing a wheel. That's a problem. So because of that, they have to give these guys some time in order to get from place to place to place. But this season with 23 races, yeah, these teams are going to be feeling it a lot more than they have necessarily in the past, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about putting, thousands of pounds worth of machinery onto cargo planes, cargo ships. Obviously, they've got, people, men and women that, this is all they do is just plan logistically speaking. It's they keep, think of, UPS doing what they do. They've got the same equivalent for Formula One, thinking a month in advance. I'm sure that they've already got, some equipment, on its way to Russia or wherever the case may be, just to try to get things on the way. I mean, we're talking about a sport that's going through, 4 or 5 different continents. And to Andy's point, crossing the pond several times throughout the year. It's going to be a wild season. Normally, in a typical season, we might have a week off between races, give or take like that. We've got this weird stretch right now. Traditionally speaking, the first race of the year would start in Australia at Melbourne. Because of COVID, it's a street course, so they kind of really have to set everything up on, everyday race or everyday streets that people use. So logistically, that's a nightmare, especially if you're not 100% sure that you're going to be able to have fans or not. So they've actually moved that race towards the end of the season in hopes that they'll have a good amount of fans in person. And so we've started the season a little bit later, but we're also finishing a little bit later. But everything is just compacted. So normally we'd already be 2 races into the season before we had this kind of weird gap here. But yeah, it's going to be, even from a podcasting standpoint, we joke around, like, make sure we get our throat lozenges together, make sure we get our water bottles, protect your voice, because we typically do 2 episodes for every single race, a preview and a review. And right there, we've got 46 episodes, in a 52-week year. And I'm sure we'll have plenty of other things along the way. So we joke about the struggles that we have, and it's nothing compared to what the men and women in F1 are going to have to go through. They're not going to see much of their families this year, unfortunately. But
true.
If there's one sport or one profession that I think people would be willing to do that for, it's certainly F1 is one that they're willing to make that sacrifice for.
Yeah, that's interesting because, I'm used to, I guess, back to like week after week, but I guess, Formula One, different countries going back and forth. So I didn't even realize that. So that's intriguing, and that makes it, I guess, more exciting. So do you guys have any predictions on who wins the next race?
Yeah, for me, like I said, I think it's, if I'm a betting man, I've got to put my money on Max Verstappen. We did our season preview episode or prediction episode, and certainly I think we're going to get some wrong, as we typically do, and we'll have a lot of crap talking between hosts throughout the year based on some of our predictions. But I predicted Lewis Hamilton to win his 8th championship, but I've also predicted Red Bull to take the Constructors' Championship for the first time since Andy, 2013, 2012, 2013. Yeah. So I think, again, I think ultimately speaking, Red Bull finally have 2 drivers that look like they will be contending week after week after week. Max Verstappen has always been their team leader, but they've got, the phenom, I call him the silent assassin, Checo, Sergio Perez from Mexico. He's part of the Red Bull group now. He's a F1 veteran. The guy, he doesn't always qualify well on Saturdays, but on Sundays, he, sometimes you look at the tables, after the race, and the guy is, you're like, he's P4, he's in like, he started 12th. Like, how does that even happen in Formula One? Sometimes you don't even see much of him on the broadcast, but he's just making moves left and right. And that's kind of why I call him the silent assassin. He finds a way week after week after week to show up even in Bahrain, he was technically last twice because the car stalled out and actually turned off on the formation, the pace lap leading up to the race. He had to literally reboot the car, kind of like a Control-Alt-Delete for a Formula One style. And because of that, he had to start the race from pit lane. And then in finishing, fifth place, I think, Andy. So, I mean, the guy is incredible. And if they've got two drivers that can do that week after week, Mercedes could be in for some hurt. So, but for the next race, yeah, I've got to put my money on Max Verstappen. I think this track, Red Bull has always been a handling car. They haven't always had the best horsepower, but they've always been able to handle well. And now that they've got horsepower to match handling, I think this track is going to suit them very well.
So for the next race coming up, I think it may be a Red Bull 1-2. And I think also, if you're a new fan coming into it, watch the qualifying session on Saturday morning if you can, because this track may not race the best, because as we talked about earlier, it's kind of it's really difficult to actually pull a pass off because the cars are very wide and the track is very thin. But the qualifying is going to be kind of everybody kind of putting their cards on the table. What do we really have? And now we're going to somewhere other than Bahrain for the first time in these cars. So now we're really going to get the chance to see, are the problems that Mercedes were having, are they track specific or are they car specific? Well, we don't really know. Is Red Bull really that dominant, or were they really just that dominant at Bahrain? We didn't really know yet. So yeah, it's going to be a fascinating weekend coming up. I'm so looking forward to it because, again, like I said, for the first time in a long time, we're going into a Formula One weekend where we don't know what's going to happen, and that's awesome.
Before we end the interview, do you guys want to talk more about your podcast?
Yeah, so we're an American-based podcast. We've all of us started out of Chicago. We've two out of the four of us have kind of spread out to different things. One being myself in North Carolina. We have one up on our way up to New York, New Jersey area. But Chicago is still, always going to be the home base location. But we're entering our third season in F1. We've got a wide variety of experience. Myself and Andy have been watching F1 for multiple decades now. Our other two hosts are newer fans, but equally as passionate as we are. So we have a really nice mix of experience of old school, new school. We pretty much all support different teams, so we have a lot of good rivalries from a week-to-week basis. You can find us literally on basically any podcasting app. And, we give our predictions and we have a good time with it. And then, on Sunday nights, we do a deep dive review into the race. We go through driver by driver, really talk about their weekends. We've got kind of all the stats to back it up. And we do that on Sunday night to, make sure that by Monday morning, when you're heading into work or you're, walking to your living room right now during COVID to turn on your laptop, you've got your podcast ready for you, waiting on you on Sunday or on Monday morning. But yeah, we have a really good time. We talk a lot of smack with each other. I think we've got a really nice comical mix between the four of us. And if you're a lot of our listeners international, but we've seen such a growth on the American side. You're an American fan, you're just getting into the sport. We actually have an episode out there, an F1 for beginners, that we update every single year with the newest drivers, the latest, kind of facts about the cars. We really break it down for a brand new fan who just happened to watch, Drive to Survive on Netflix and is like, what is Formula One? We break it down to that level and allow the casual fan to kind of catch up and really understand what's going on. So yeah, I think we've got a nice mix that we bring in. You can find, we got a website, www.outlapf1.com. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at OutlapF1 Podcast. We have a Discord channel. So if someone out there just wants to learn about F1 and kind of build an F1 community, that's the place to go. So definitely check out our Linktree on Twitter. Andy, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, and we always really encourage young fans, old fans, new fans, old fans, whoever, to interact with us. Send us questions. There is no such thing as a stupid question. We've gone everywhere from what do the three, why do the drivers only have 3 letters in their names on the scoring thing, on the right-hand side of the screen, to all sorts of different questions. And we get into sometimes tire mechanics. Last year we had this big controversy about brake ducts. So we had to get into all sorts of technical research about what makes a brake duct and why is it right and why is this one wrong. But it's great. John and James were the founders of this thing. They brought me in last year. Then we met Deanna on Twitter. We brought her in for this year. So I think it's just all 4 of us, I think, are really, as John mentioned, it's an awesome dynamic that we've got going on. And like I said, we also encourage, the more people want to interact with us, the better. We love talking about this sport. It's a Thursday night and we're talking about it because we love to do it. So yeah. However you want to interact with us is totally cool with us.
All right. Thanks, guys, for joining, and can't wait for the next race.
Yeah, I appreciate you having us on. We'll talk to you soon.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Town Podcast, or the STP Pod for short. If you want to check out more videos of the Sports Town Podcast, click on the left. If you want to subscribe to the channel, click on the right.